Okay. Dear children, I have tried to identify the topics into the questions because it is always a challenge to identify the answers to the questions asked in the board exam. So from the very first topic of chapter 1, IED, that's Indian Economic Development, the question I have taken here is identify the reasons for which India was called a prosperous economy or country before the Britishers started ruling. It's a very simple thing. Most of us know that India was known as the bird of gold. Here I give you a bonus question of 1 mark, which is when and for how long did the British rule over India? So officially they started ruling India from 1856 and they ruled about 200 years. As we know that 1947 we got independence. But why were we called as an independent economy? So you can see here the first point is self-sufficient. They were the self-sufficient economy. That means we were called self-sufficient because of its agricultural produce. We had agriculturally been known a self-sufficient economy because we were able to grow the food crops required by the population, including rice. Rice was our staple diet. And we had sufficient of production as we were the agrarian economy. The second point, of course, the most important point, which is monopoly over the exports of multiple items. What multiple items these were? It's again a 1 marker, children. You should know and remember these that we had monopoly over the exports of textiles like muslin. You must have read and remember that box, which is there in NCERT textbook. Other than that, we had pearls, many other materials, especially dependent on handicraft industries. And, there is again a content given by historian. He doubted that India will soon drain the entire gold of the world. It was again because of this monopoly that they believed that India is going to have the entire gold of foreign trade, which was being traded into or which was into the flow of the economy in the world. So this is the very first and the basic part of this chapter, introductory part. Then second part or topic which starts is all about the features or characteristics of Indian economy. So the question asked out of this is state some characteristics of Indian economy and society on the eve of independence, or how did Indian economy look like, or what were the challenges of Indian economy on the eve of independence. So they can be multiple languages, but the answer is going to remain the same. This is the second topic. The first pointer over here is it was a stagnant economy. Now, stagnancy is a word which is never a positive. It never sounds positive. It means that Indian economy had to struggle on various grounds. It was struggling on the ground of GDP, as it is written that its GDP growth rate was even less than 2%. The per capita income growth was even less than 0.5%. And now when it comes to 0.3, I hope you can see the cursor. I'm putting it on the third point. For you, as per the bullet, it is the fourth point, low agricultural products. Agricultural produce had definitely reduced because of the negligence and many other reasons of the existing and simultaneous economy, which I'll be discussing in the next topic. And next point, which can be discussed over here, is although the world was having a phase of industrialization in 1857, we could see that India was not at all developing in manufacturing industry. It did not have any position. So it could definitely not support the Indian economy. And moreover, as we discussed in the last topic, you can see the last point. I hope you can see the cursor, destruction of handicraft industries. I just told you a few minutes back that India had monopoly of trade over multiple things, especially handicraft industry. The Britishers had intentionally and systematically destroyed the handicraft industry. Now, as we have understood that nothing was positive about Indian economy, and in the very first topic, I told you that India was an agrarian economy or agricultural economy. But during the British period, agriculture of India had also been systematically destroyed. It was on its worst phase. We lost a lot in the agricultural sector as well. So if somebody asks you that why, what were the reasons that the agricultural sector of India was also suffering from stagnancy. So the first very point is, you remember this, if you're asked this question for one marker, then only one statement can satisfy this, that is land settlement system, because this is the most important reason, or you can say that this is the most accountable reason because of which agriculture in India had been destroyed. So the first point which we have is land settlement system. You must think that what it is. Land settlement system was again a consequence of bad intent, where they decided that the land in India would be handled under commune system, or you may say it's a particular system under which we gave birth to zamindari. You must have heard this word, zamindari or landlord system. The lands were under the ownership of the landlords or the zamindars. They were the only owner of the lands, and most of the land, you may say that majority of the share was held by them only. Whereas the common farmers did not have an opportunity to have ownership or claim ownership on their lands. This settlement or land settlement system actually discouraged the farmers to the worst. Then comes his revenue settlement system. This is another major reason, as revenue settlement is associated with revenue taxes. The government of imperial rule or British rule was only interested to earn or drain out the wealth out of India. So they wanted to collect their majority of revenue from agriculture, as they knew this very well, that India is an agrarian economy. They enforced two kinds of taxes, which can be called roughly as dual taxation system also on the farmers. First was levied by the Britishers and the other was levied by the zamindars. The third reason, which definitely helped the poor agricultural conditions of India, is the third point you can see, which is forced commercialization of products. There is a spelling mistake, please avoid. The forced commercialization of product is all about, if you remember in history, in junior classes, you studied about the Andolan or movement of Champaran, which was against the indigo product. So the British government was very much interested in getting the commercial products from the farmers, especially the crops like cotton, sugarcane, indigo, and many more harmful crops like opium. The farmers definitely were not in the favor, but they were forced to do so. And this, directly or indirectly, was a reason for them to lose their occupation, as they were no more able to grow their original crops like food crops and all. And moreover, the commercial crops what they were growing, they were not getting sufficient of returns, as the prices were not able to be bargained. The Britishers had monopoly over the prices of the commercial products also, as there was no other buyer in the market. Other than this, as we just learned, that British had so much of interest, their wasted interest was all lying in agricultural sector, but in spite of so much of return, they never had any kind of focus or attention towards the growth of the agricultural sector. They never thought of fighting with the situations like drought, situations like famine, or the poor conditions of revenue system in India. So continuity of this land settlement system, revenue settlement system, converted majority of farmers into tillers. Now, who are the tillers? Tillers are, of course, the laborers or agricultural laborers. Now, there was a fraction, or you may say that there was a little number of farmers who were the owners, whereas majority of farmers were the tillers. Owners had their own interest, whereas tillers had their own interest. Therefore, there was generally conflict between the farmers and the tillers. They were highly dependent on monsoon, And of course, there were no scientific changes incorporated into agricultural system of India. Therefore, altogether, all these factors became a reason behind agricultural stagnancy. Now, very, very important topic, which is generally asked in the form of 1 marker, 3 marker, and sometimes 4 marker also. This is the next topic of the chapter, which is related to deindustrialization. It had certain motive. So the question above said itself has two portions, which is what do you understand by deindustrialization, and explain the twofold motives of the Britishers. First of all, what is deindustrialization? It's a systematic destruction of the handicraft industry of India. Along with that, it also destroyed the setup or the boost of the modern industry in India. That means they never allowed any modern industry in India. So why did they do this? While they were ruling over India, they were earning so much from India. Why did they not want the modern industry to be set up? And why did they destroy the handicraft industry of India? So they had the motives. And these motives were all having a systematic intended plan, which was the first, to reduce India to the status of mere exporter of important raw materials for the upcoming modern industries in Britain. We know this very well that in 1857, when they started ruling India, soon after that, there was industrial revolution taking place in entire Europe. Britain was also one of them. They needed a lot of raw material for supporting the industries, or you may say home industries. Therefore, they never wanted India to have some industries or the modern industries so that they could exploit entire raw materials for their own uses or wasted interest. Now, the second motive, what was that second one, which is actually more important? You know, when you're producing something in your own country, you need a market as well. Britain, with very small population and a very small land area, was never able to satisfy the needs of the market and customers. So now it was time for the Britishers to look for the unseen markets or new markets. So what they started doing is they started exploiting their colonial countries as their market. And they knew this very well, that if they allow the Indian economy to grow as industrial economy, they'll not be able to sell their cheap and useless products into Indian market. Therefore, they stopped with the intentions of the Indians. They actually checked the intention of the Indians. Like there were so many industrial houses. I may call about Tagore's, I may call about Birla's, I may call about the Tatas. They actually discouraged them to have any other new industry set up in India. I hope you have understood this topic. This is very important. It has a 1 marker as well, which is what do you understand by deindustrialization, and the motives as well. And the plus point over this answer is you can take a screenshot as well. This particular answer written over here is completely supported by the NCERT language. And NCERT language is something which proves to be a blessing for the students, as the answer key and the question paper are always supported by the NCERT language. Now, as I just told you, I guess there's a glitch. Okay. As I just told you, that modern industry in India were not at all growing, and it was seriously a challenge for the Indian economy, but then blessing in disguise. Children, soon the European countries were engaged in the World War I and World War II. You're aware of the dates they started. So soon, the sooner the European economy was involved in the World War I and World War II, the Britishers had to take the support of their colonial countries for the production. So in the same duration, there was encouragement to multiple industries in India, especially jute industry. But prior to that also, that means the World War I and World War II, you could see here highlighted statements. There were some of the industries, especially the large scale industries or capital industry, you may say, like cotton, jute, textile mills, iron and steel industry, like Tata Iron Steel Company, which is TISCO. The Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO, is again a one marker, which was incorporated in the year 1907. I repeat, there were certain industries prior to the World War I and World War II had already been set up in India because of the good relations of some business houses and business persons from Parsi community, as they had a very good connect with the Britishers, and they could definitely get the support of the British officials in setting up of these industries. So the industries which were set up were majorly textile industries, which were set up in Maharashtra, Gujarat, and some parts of West Bengal, of course. Other than this, another major achievements which we had is, of course, TISCO, which we know. Still we have, I hope you can see the cursor. This is Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO, which was set up in 1907. It's a one marker, please have a record of it. Later on, there were some supporting industries set up in India, which was sugar industry, cement, and paper industries. And later, as I just mentioned, that during the world wars, all these industries got a widespread market, as these products were also demanded in Europe, as entire Europe and some parts of America was busy in war. After all these innovations, Indian industry could have a gear in the major industries or the capital industries, which was actually seriously lacking after the losses of the handicraft industries. So this can be a probable question. Out of this portion, especially the thing which is asked is name the industries. So you can see the highlighted portions over here about the industries, and of course the ones related to the industries which have also been mentioned here. And I repeat, children, it's a very important one marker, that is TISCO and its establishment here. Then comes a very important question again, frequently asked is an option. That is indicate the indicate the volume and the direction of trade at the time of independence. I have already mentioned that before the British rule, Indian economy had always trade surplus. Now, what is trade surplus? Trade surplus is a situation where we export more than what we import. So we were always on trade surplus. Now, surprisingly, we were on trade surplus even when we were being ruled by the British. Yes, it's something positive. And how could all this be possible? Actually, this sounds something very positive, but then it had certain composition and it had certain structure. So I would discuss that all in points. The first thing is that we were allowed to trade only with 3 countries, which is China. Please look at the cursor. China, Ceylon, which is presently known as Sri Lanka, and Persia, which is presently known as Iran. This all trade could be easily possible by the opening of Suez Canal. Now, Suez Canal is very much known to you as you have studied this chapter, but when was it established? So the year is 1869. Please have a record of it. Suez Canal question is always a one marker. That when was it established? So it was established, it's a man-made linking route established by the Britishers to reduce the distance of the exported items, and it was established in the year 1869. Second point, as I just mentioned, that we always had large export surplus as we were in trade surplus. Trade surplus, that means we had more of the exports and less of the import. And nothing to be very happy about, because the surplus which came out of this export in our economy was all on the cost of the essential commodities. Which essential commodities? Food grains, clothes, kerosene, and of course, we cannot forget the raw materials, which were the backbone for the growth of any economy. And third thing, it was not only about the exports of the essential commodities, but the British also had the policies of restrictions on tariff. Now, the British happily levied dual tariff. Remember, this is a one marker. You may be asked, what is a dual tariff system? So they persuaded dual tariff system for the export and import policy of Indian economy. What was that? When the Britishers had to export something from India to their own country or native country, they made everything tax free. There were no tariff on that. Whereas if anything was to be exported to the rest of the world, there were high taxes levied on it. Therefore, the Indian producers could not compete with the Indian producers could not compete with the other producers of the world. Likewise, when anything was imported to India from Britain, it was completely tax-free. It had no taxes or tariffs at all on it. Whereas if it was taken up from or imported from any other part of the world, there were high taxes on it. This is a very important question. Please remember, children, whenever please remember these 3 points to be mentioned, you can definitely make the changes as per your idea about the question, but don't miss these 3 pointer contents. Now, I right now had a discussion about trade surplus, that India had trade surplus. So based on that, I'm now going to discuss a very, very, very important topic to you, which is drain of wealth. Remember, it can be a one marker also. That is why it's written on your screen in bold letters. I put my cursor over here, drain of Indian wealth. Sometimes it is asked in one markers that what do you mean by drain of Indian wealth? So when we had trade or export surplus, it resulted into lot of money or lot of flow of money into our economy. But that money was actually not being used by the Indians or were not being used by authorities of India. They were actually being used by the Britishers. And therefore, this money was directly or indirectly being diverted towards British economy. Therefore, it is called as drain of Indian wealth. Now, what were the uses? Why do we call that there was drain of Indian wealth? How was this money being exploited? So this can be a 3-mark question or sometimes in an optional question for 2 marks. So the first use was made for the expenses on the war. See, the Britishers kept fighting so many wars, maybe the World War I, World War II, or multiple other wars fought against Russia or France. But then whatever wars incurred during the rule of the British in India, the money or the expenses were managed directly or indirectly by these export surpluses. Second is they imported invisible items. You must be thinking what they imported in the name of invisible item. Of course, the services. They appointed multiple British authorities, officers in India to rule smoothly, and they were paid on a very high amount. A handsome payment was made to them. Therefore, the money which was earned by Indian export was being completely exploited by British administration. Maintenance of railways, maintenance of their administrative services, maintenance of postal services, their own extravagant ways of livelihood or living standards were all reasons of drain of Indian wealth. This, as I mentioned, is one of the most important one marker, that is drain of wealth. Although in NCERT it is just mentioned for 2 lines, but generally asked for 3 markers. So it's a matter to be kept in the memory. Then comes the next topic of this chapter, which is associated with the handicraft industry's destruction. I long back told you that the British had systematically destroyed the handicraft industry, as I mentioned it, on the name of systematic deindustrialization. I repeat, children, systematic deindustrialization. How could it be possible that so long run handicraft industry with so much of glory in the world, with so much of monopoly in the world, would be destroyed by the Britishers? As soon as the Britishers started ruling India, they had their monopoly over economy and politics. So they didn't allow any trader to make their own rule, to make their own system, to make their own bargaining possible. Therefore, the handicraft industry would no longer survive and had to succumb. Dual tariff policy. In the second last topic, I talked to you about dual tariff policy. I once briefed it. When anything imported from Britain or to Britain exported directly, there were no tariffs. Whereas if anything exported to the rest of the world or imported from the rest of the world other than Britain, there were high taxes charged on them. Then comes competition with machine-made goods. You must have learned in junior classes, that is inventions of steam engine. When steam engine was invented, there was also the age of industrialization in the world, where everything right from cotton to jute, sugar to paper was being produced on machines. But in India, still we dependent on handmade goods, which were expensive. Of course, having good quality, but very expensive, which could not compete with the machine-made goods. Then comes is the next point, habits and the lifestyle. Habits and the lifestyle of the people were changing. You must have seen in many of the movies, in many of the series, and many of these dances or some of the play or somewhere else in the stories that people in India or anywhere else were trying to adopt the habits of the other culture, or they were trying to actually adapt themselves as per the intruders in their own country. So when the habits and the lifestyle of the people were changing, they demanded for the foreign products more than the domestic products. For example, sugar. We never knew how to produce sugar, neither did we know how to use it. But after the rule of the British and living with the British for long, we learned what is sugar and how do we use it. So we started consuming sugar and producing sugar as well. Then comes is raw material control. The British has complete control over the raw materials. That means other than their wishes and other than their desire, nobody else could touch the available raw material in the economy. And of course, so very, very important reason, which is end of princely states. We know this very well that when the British started ruling India, the Indian queens, kings, and the princes were no more in existence or were no more in power. These princes, these kings and queens always had a patronship to the artists and artisans. But with the end of these princely states, these artists and artisans also lost their patronship. As soon as they lost their patronship, they hardly had any market in the world. They hardly had any support in the economy or support to trade their goods in the international market. It's not a direct question. It was never there directly in NCERT, but yes, it is an asked question. Now proceeding to the next question, it's a next topic, and children, a very important topic as it contains a lot of one markers in it. All these points mentioned on your screen can all be possible one mark questions, and one markers are the major reasons to lose your marks. So remember, do not take it lightly. If you're asked the demographic status of Indian economy till 1947, or you're asked any of the individual prospect, you need to answer as per this. Remember, the data has been taken from NCERT, so there is no variation. So the first thing we should know about the demographic status, that we started conducting census. The first very census conducted in India was in the year 1881. But remember, there are two types of questions asked out of it, which we need to be very careful about. The first thing is, when was official census conducted in independent India? Then the answer changes. It is 1951. You can have a record that is 1951. Whereas if it is just asked that when was the first census or official census conducted in India, it is 1881. I hope you can see the cursor. I'm putting the cursor, that is 1881. Now comes, as there are so many one markers over here, so I would like to use annotation over here. Now, during the period 1881 to 1947, there was record of high birth rate and high death rate. So we could see that because of the high birth rate and high death rate, which was recorded especially before 1921, this period is called as the year of Great Divide. You can see over here, the cursor I'm putting, that's the year of Great Divide. It's again a one marker. Which year is known as the year of Great Divide, or which year is known as the year of transition? That is the year of 1921. Why? Because before this, the birth rate and death rate were both high. Literacy rate of India was very nominal. It was total 16%, whereas the female literacy rate was even lower, which was only 7%. I can show you that is 7%. IMR, that is infant mortality rate, which is at present only 40, was so high as 218 to 18. Life expectancy at present is 68 years, whereas in past, in the British period, was just 44 years. That means average life of a person was just 44 years. GDP, as I mentioned long back in the same session, was less than 2%, and per capita income growth rate was less than 5%. So these are all one markers, and it can be a long answer of 3-4 marks as well. Now, a very interesting question. That is, what were the contribution of the Britishers in India? Or were there any positive things we gained during the British period? Or there's one more way they ask you the questions out of the topic infrastructure given in NCERT. That whatever growth of infrastructure was done by the Britishers, were there vested interest of the British only? So yes, answer has always to be yes. That is why I've written a big yes over there. The reasons, first is railway. Remember children, it's again a one marker. It was established in the year 1850. Although the first train started in 1853. So don't get confused. The railway established in India was 1850. The railways which started in 1850 was all set up to connect the different parts of India and to carry or transport the goods of British, as well as to make the ruling and safety. That means to easily transport their war goods and their arms and ammunition so that they could rule India and stop the rebellion acts in different parts of India. Roadways were built again to connect with railways and ports. There were many ports developed in India, especially in the parts of West Bengal, Gujarat, Maharashtra, to connect themselves with the rest of the world, especially Britain. A gift from the British, of course, that was postal services and communication. India still has the postal services which were established during the British rule. During communication, means during the period of the British rule, the communication developed was in the form of telephone services, which were of course not available in every house, but they were established by them. And the best thing, which is the banking sector, as per the Banking Act developed by the Britishers in 1935, we first had our bank in India. We started Imperial Bank of India, which is now known as Reserve Bank of India. And let us not forget that is airways. Yes, we did not have many more flights. We did not have many more airports. But in 1932, the Tata Group had first started its airways, which was known as Tata Airways. Children, a fun fact, the same Tata Airways was later taken up by the government of India and known as Air India, which has again been undertaken by Tata Group only. Now, proceeding to the last topics of this chapter, were there any positive contributions made by the Britishers? So, yes, there were so many. There's a glitch, I'm sorry. Yes, there were so many positive impacts. You can just count on to the same topics, which are, I just talked to you about: railways, postal system, banking and monetary system, parliamentary system, additional point, that is parliamentary system, which is being established by the Britishers, which we have been continuing so far. And the democratic system had also been adopted by the influence of the European countries only. The Western education system today we can see is also a gift of the Britishers only to India, because they introduced the subjects like geography, science, math, although I can't say and I can't claim that it was purely only by the gift or by the efforts of the Britishers, but the changes in the system, which is exam patterns, schooling and all, were introduced by the Britishers only. That was Lord Macaulay who introduced it in India for the first time. Commercialization of agriculture. The Indian believed in simple living and high thinking. They believed in subsistence farming. I repeat the term, it can be a one marker as well. Subsistence farming. That means agriculture only for living or surviving. But it was the Britishers who gave a point of view to convert Indian agriculture into a commercial aspect, where the Britishers taught the Indian farmers that we can easily earn and can easily get employment out of agricultural prospect also. Now, the last thing, during the British rule, we ultimately suffered with multiple serious famine, where lakhs of people counted to be killed. But it was the British who made us realize that we can have public distribution system where we can store the food and can fight with the famine. That means the surplus should not be wasted, it should be secured. And soon we learned to have food security for our country, which in future worked. That's it. Thank you so much.